So now let's look at the characteristics of fairy tales. Even though fairy tales seem simple on the surface, they are rich in meaning. They can be interpreted many different ways and give different messages to different people. As we've discussed, all fairy tales have a central message or theme, sometimes more than one. They also share some other characteristics. They can convey a message, which is often a lesson. Remember that the message can be a moral lesson or it can be a pearl of wisdom about everyday life. They are set in the distant past or have a timeless setting. They begin with once upon a time. And we're going to see several movie examples where the movies begin, or at least have early on in the movie, the words once upon a time or some variation. Even modern day movie versions of fairy tales have a timeless quality. The costumes and sets seem like a storybook. Fairy tales also have a narrative structure. They are works of fiction. Remember, fiction is a text that comes from the author's imagination and does not take place in the real world. Sometimes it can take place in the imagination of a culture, as we're going to see in later weeks as we go through different versions of a fairy tale. Many fairy tales began as spoken stories passed down from generation to generation. Fairy tales are also narratives. Remember that the purpose of a narrative is to tell a story. Narratives are organized in time order and use signal words such as first, next, then, last, later, later on, and finally to let you know that you are reading a time order story. Stories tell a series of events. What happens after the most exciting event in the story? Oftentimes, loose ends are tied up. Fairy tales also have magical elements. Some of these magical elements include people, animals, or objects. They have clearly good and clearly evil characters. Most fictional stories include one or more main characters who face a challenge or must solve a problem. This character is usually called the protagonist, and the protagonist is oftentimes one of the good characters. Sometimes this problem can be a struggle with the character's own feelings or a struggle against a force of nature. In fairy tales, however, the challenge or problem is almost always an evil character or a bad guy. This character is also called the antagonist. Many fairy tales include helpers who assist the main character. In most tales, the main characters must rely on other people or beings for needed items, abilities, or knowledge along the way. This is to serve as a reminder that everyone needs helpers in their own lives. The fairy tale may include a transformation or a dramatic change. Sometimes these are magical, such as man to beast or frog to prince or pumpkin to carriage, that would not work in more realistic stories or movies. We would not accept them or believe them possible, but in fairy tales, we do accept them because they're part of a fairy tale's structure and elements. This acceptance of magical things happening or fantastical things happening is called suspension of disbelief. We set aside our disbelief while we are reading the story. We enter into a magical world or realm that operates under a different set of rules. Most of the time, fairy tales have a happy ending. The girl marries the prince, the poor children get rich, or the rightful ruler takes back the throne. All of these happy endings serve to give readers hope. They tell us that in the end, all will be well. Since there is a lot of unhappiness in the world, people like to hear this message over and over again. They really want to believe that everything will turn out all right, or better than all right, in the end. So here are some examples of the settings of fairy tales. Oftentimes castles or the woods with, magical fairies or gnomes or dwarves, you know, settings that, are cute and quaint and magical or scary and fantastical appear in fairy tales. We also have the phrase once upon a time. And we're going to pause here and go and look at a few examples of movies that have the phrase once upon a time or something similar in its opening.